Cool. Okay. I think let's begin. So, welcome everybody. Notice that there's people from all over the world joining. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I hope you're all well. Welcome to day 1 of 4 of the SpecFlow BDD Masterclass. Today will be around practicing BDD with SpecFlow. And your host today, Gáspár Nagy, he's a trainer, he's an author, and he's also a founding member of SpecFlow, so you're in good hands. And today I'll be playing the role of the glamorous assistant, and I am a user support engineer here at SpecFlow. So before we begin, just a couple of guidelines. So please use the Q&A tool for questions. If you put them in the chat, they might get missed if we don't get around to answering them later, and we can always extract them if they're put in the Q&A. So please do put them there. Upvote any questions you find interesting. We'll save the questions for the Q&A at the end. We've got a dedicated section, and that's just so we don't disrupt the flow of Gáspár when he's going through his content. There'll be a quiz during the webinar, so it'll be a bit of fun for us. So make sure you have your phones ready, because that's how, well, or your PC, but your phone probably more convenient. So make sure you have that ready, and the winner will receive a prize. So be prepared to share your email address with me so we can get in touch with you later on. Also, if you attend all 4 of the Masterclass webinars, then we're going to do a raffle for an Amazon voucher. So if you can attend them all, then great. And the webinar, I can't stress this enough, but the recording will be shared after the 4 days have finished. So likely towards the end of the week, you'll get a follow-up email with the details of the webinar and the links and all that good stuff. So we have a poll first of all. So you will have to ignore the last question. But the first question, have you used SpecFlow before? And the second question, what is your role? Hopefully you can see the poll. The last one, to attend yesterday's session, unfortunately Zoom blankets these polls across all 4 days for us, so you'll just have to ignore that one for today. But we'll let that run for just a second. It looks like we're about halfway there. Okay. And we will end it there, and you should see the results on screen now. So about 50-50 for whether people have used SpecFlow before, so that's good, that's interesting. Hopefully you will learn something, and even the people that have used SpecFlow before, I'm sure you will learn a great deal also. It looks like the tester footprint is the largest here, followed by developers, and then followed by product owners, scrum masters, and BAs. So that's cool, super cool. So Gáspár, I'll invite you to share your screen.
Will do. Hello everyone. I hope you do see that now.
Yes.
My windows are actually on the wrong place. And yeah, it's always rearranging my well done setup. So welcome everyone. Yeah, as Jordan said, good morning, good evening, good night, especially for the Philippines who are joining. There must be very, very late there, but also in India it's quite late. So thank you very much for joining, and I hope you will enjoy this session, and we hope that you will stick with us for the other 3 days as well. So basically, the concept of this thing that we have called BDD Masterclass or SpecFlow Masterclass, there is a little bit of puzzle between what is the exact name of the thing that we are doing now, but never mind. So the concept with the masterclass that we or the idea with the masterclass that we had last year was that we are trying to make some sort of in-depth session which can be used to level up your BDD and SpecFlow knowledge, and we wanted to design this in a way that it's valuable for those who are new to BDD and SpecFlow, and also to those who have been already practicing BDD or BDD and SpecFlow together. So definitely the thing, and you will see that these are 2.5-hour sessions 4 times. It will be quite in-depth, and it will be definitely a little bit beyond the simple introduction. but we designed it in a way that for most of the courses or most of the sessions don't necessarily need coding sessions or coding skills to follow. There will be one we will do more in-depth coding, but we are trying to level up in a way that most of you can enjoy that. So basically, we also did that, or the concept of this masterclass is that it will be I don't know, like a 2 hours content session, and then maybe 2 and 15 minutes, and we will have a longer Q&A at the end, especially if I will do well with my timing, which is obviously always challenging for such a session where there are a lot to say. So that's that it is. Still, we will have some interactive parts, so we will have a nice quiz in the middle where you can also use to refresh and also to win some prize. So I definitely invite you to join. But obviously, this will be more like in a webinar format. So I will talk and it will be more of listeners. If you are interested in instructor-led online SpecFlow courses, I'm also doing such things. Check out my website. I will show a couple of times different links on my slide. Obviously, you cannot click that, but Jordan is so nice and he's always pasting the link to the chat window, or some link to the chat window. Maybe he will just trick you and paste something completely. No, just joking. So that's how it is. So the SpecFlow is currently in the hand of Tricentis, and there is a SpecFlow team there. I'm just an external to them, and basically whatever you hear today in the webinar and on the other days is my personal opinion. So if I say something that is really weird to you, for example, that BDD is not testing or something like that, don't go to them, don't bother them, come to me. But there is a chance that I will say, and sorry for that, I had to make this because this is the thing is called a masterclass. So it can happen that I will answer that I am your master. Obey me, you shall, or maybe that's not the right Yoda voice, but let's be Yoda with us in this session, and let's jump into the middle. So basically we have 4 lessons, and probably on the website you have already seen what are the topics of this of these 4 days. Basically the first day, the 2 days session, we would like to give you a kind of overview where we are, the title is Practicing BDD with SpecFlow. So try to show you the benefits of BDD and the core workflow of how people can work with BDD and SpecFlow. So that's the 2 days thing. So we will see everything a little bit. Tomorrow we will focus on the topic which is called formulation. Basically, this is how to write good SpecFlow BDD scenarios with give and then keywords. We will see many things there. The day 3, so the lesson 3, will go deeper into the coding part. So what kind of coding patterns, libraries, automation related things, and of course the SpecFlow features will also be shown there. And on Thursday, we will have a session about maintaining your BDD solution. That way we are talking quite much about refactoring, how to keep it in a healthy structure, especially if you have multiple scenarios, several hundreds of scenarios, how to structure them in a way that you don't spend too much effort on the maintenance. So that's basically the structure of the 4 lessons. So today, this is the overview day, so to say. Basically, we have 3 main topics. The first one is a very simple question: what is BDD? And of course, many of you have heard about BDD, and many of you have maybe even practiced BDD. But let's just wrap that up and let's just maybe see it from a little bit from a different angle. All those things that you have seen. So that will be the first part. The second part will be showing the process with a case walkthrough. I have a sample application, and I will show how a new feature, a new user story of a sample application can be implemented, and what kind of steps do we need from really the core idea of the new feature to the final testing and the release thing. So this mainly are going to be demo sessions, and the third one will be about the different testing methods and how BDD sits among the different testing methods. So it will be a comparison between different things you might have heard of, or you might have practiced. For example, test-driven development is a very common question. What is the difference between TDD and BDD? And I'm trying to give some hints on that one. So that's basically our agenda for today. And I would say, let's get started. So as I said, the first question or first topic is, what is BDD and how SpecFlow relates to it? So how can we position that? And I'm pretty sure that, especially if you are here in this webinar, then you have seen or whenever you have heard about BDD, probably the first thing that comes to your mind is a BDD scenario with the very famous given, when, and then keywords. Maybe something like the one that you see on the screen. And I would like to start here, because that's the core element, or probably the most important element of the process. So what is a BDD scenario, and what does that represent? And to be able to understand that, and to be able to understand what are the benefits of BDD, I was trying to seek for some metaphor, and of course, all metaphors are a little bit false. But right now in this webinar, I will use the bridge metaphor. It's not my idea. Actually, Gojko Ejic had a book, Bridging the Communication Gap, and this is where I was stealing this concept. That imagine that BDD scenario is something which is a bridge, which is connecting the requirements and the solutions. So imagine that on one side we have the requirements, on the other side we have the solution, the application that we are developing, and we would like to make a bridge between them using the scenarios. And you might think that now that, okay, but why do we need a bridge? So why do we need to, what is the gap that we would like to connect between these two things? And obviously there are many different things, and maybe those things that I'm mentioning now are not the most important ones for you, but typically many teams, especially if they are trying to practice agile software development, come to questions, for example, that whenever they have requirements, how can you make the requirements testable? So not tests that are running and turning to green, but how can you make sure that the real requirements were tested? Or from the other side, so if you have many automated tests, for example, that how can you make your tests better understandable? I don't know if you had this experience. I definitely had that many times, that you come back to your automated test like half a year later or a year later, and it's sometimes very hard to understand what I really wanted to test with that. I see the steps, I see what it is doing, but what I wanted to do with that, that's an interesting question. And maybe that's something that we would like to see. So that's what we would like to trying to make these things closer together and make the scenario forming a bridge between the two sides. So we mentioned scenarios. Maybe it makes sense to stop for a moment and look a little bit in detail about what a scenario is. Actually, the scenarios that you know nowadays with these given, when, then keywords are following a particular syntax, and the syntax is called a gherkin. The gherkin name comes from the tool cucumber. It's a kind of cucumber in that form. But anyway, so the point is that the gherkin syntax is dictating some sort of structure, some sort of formalism for us to write the scenarios. And probably these are very clear. So a scenario has a name, which is identifying the scenarios. Some people use the Wombear kind of naming scheme, very useful for that. We have different steps within a scenario. We have given steps that are describing the context, describing the preconditions of the particular scenario. We have when steps, which are somehow actions that are initiating, that are triggering the thing, that triggering the behavior that we wanted to describe with the scenarios. And we have then steps that are listing the expected outcome, so the verification part of the scenario. And of course, right now, we have 2 steps that are describing the context, and we are just basically combining these 2 given steps with an end keyword, which is basically just a continuation of the previous section or previous step. So that's basically a basic syntax or basic overview of a scenario. We are knowing very well the given and then English keywords, but it's very important to highlight that these keywords are not only available in English, but actually the Gherkin syntax is supporting more than 70 different languages. So I've seen many of you were joining from Spain, then you could write your scenario in Spanish or in Switzerland, where you could write it into from Italian or French or German, or maybe there is even a Swiss dialect. I don't know. I would need to check that. So depending on your business, depending on the language of the project, you might want to use or write down the scenarios with the language of the business, so that you can enable communication and avoid losing information on translation. So these are basically the core things, or the basic setup of a scenario. And we have the tool SpecFlow, which is helping us to turn these scenarios into automated tests. SpecFlow has a long history, fortunately. I started SpecFlow in 2009, which is done more than 12 years now. It's amazing to remember those times. That definitely we didn't think that SpecFlow will be such a big thing, and it's a very nice feeling to see that so many people can see the benefits of that and use this BDD framework for .NET, and which is also very important that SpecFlow is open source and free. So we are with that, we can really help that anyone on the world can have better applications and better tested applications. So that's very important. Actually, to mention maybe a few things about how SpecFlow works. We can say in general that what SpecFlow does, it just takes your scenarios and executes them, but this is not actually true. SpecFlow is not executing your scenarios directly, but basically what SpecFlow does is just working together with different execution frameworks like MS Test or NUnit, and they are together able to execute your scenarios. So MS Test or NUnit or XUnit is starting the execution, and at some point SpecFlow is taking over and processing the scenario execution itself. And unfortunately, SpecFlow doesn't speak English, so it doesn't matter how good scenarios you are writing, SpecFlow is not able to understand the individual steps. So if you are saying that I'm checking some page, then unfortunately SpecFlow will not know that. You have to provide this information, and basically you need to provide this automation code in a form of step definitions. We will see much more about that on day 3, but that's how SpecFlow works. So it's an open source project. I was just checking the exact statistics today, and turned out that on NuGet we have 27 million downloads. That's really quite much. We are really proud of that, I think. So we have seen the concept of the scenario. We have seen a few words about the SpecFlow framework. Let's try to make a definition of BDD before we move on. There are plenty of definitions of BDD, so if you are Googling for that, you will find a couple of others as well. This is a very simple one, or very condensed one. So it says that behavior-driven development is about understanding, documenting, and verifying business requirements through illustrative scenarios. And it's very important that it says that that basically the primary target of BDD is business requirements. But really a business requirements, we will talk more about that tomorrow, but basically just mention that that there are many other forms of requirements. There are performance requirements, there are usability requirements, there are security requirements. All of those things are great and very important, but they are typically not the primary target of BDD. BDD is more like this business rule kind of things. Are usually used with BDD. And whenever we have these business requirements, we would like to have a better understanding of that. or them. We want to properly document that so that we remember that what we wanted to do, and we would like to verify whether the application that we have built is really fulfilling these expectations, these requirements. You remember from my pitch, so we want to make the requirements testable, and through that, so that this understanding, documenting, and verifying will be basically done with the help of scenarios or the help of illustrative scenarios. That is, as I said, a central element of BDD. But if you look at, or if you think back what your feeling is about when you see a scenario, probably many people, if they see a scenario, their immediate response is that, well, a scenario is a test. And that's true. So scenario is an automated test. So it can be run, it will turn red or green, and it will verify your application if everything is fine. But actually, if you are thinking about a BDD scenario, the BDD scenario has multiple purposes. And one purpose is to be an automated test, but it's very important to highlight, and you will see examples today for that the scenario is also helping us to produce this, the code, helping us to produce the right system that fulfills the requirement. And for that, it's a big help that is illustrating what the requirements provide us a good example how the requirements should work even before we start doing any kind of coding. So it's also an illustration of a requirement, and it's also somewhat documenting the behavior. Of course, there can be many different forms of documentation exist, and this is one kind of documentation, but it's very good documentation about the detailed design decisions or the requirement decisions that we have made. So these are the three main purposes of a scenario. And if you think about that, you will see that they are somewhat used in different phases of the development cycle. Obviously, the first two, so illustration of the requirements and automated test, is more important when you are developing, where you are implementing the application, so in the implementation phase, and it shows some sort of test-driven approach that you might have heard of, for example, with test-driven development. And the automated test and the behavior, the documentation aspect is more important in the maintenance phase, where these automated tests are becoming a very good regression test. And if you need to know anything about how the application is supposed to work, then you can always go back to the scenario. So that's the three purposes. If I want to see it say this in a single sentence, then we can say that BDD is not only testing. So if you are only using it as a testing tool, then definitely you are not using all the benefits of that. So definitely makes sense to look beyond that and see what else we can do with BDD and SpecFlow. So we talked about scenarios, and I think an interesting question is that how does the scenarios created, or how do they appear in our system? So is it just that we are sitting down and coming up with a new scenario? So how does that work? And actually, if you are following the BDD practice, then you will see that the scenarios are typically discovered through examples. What does that mean? So if you would like to discover how the application supposed to behave even before the creation of the application, or the creation of that particular feature in the application. And let's imagine that you are sitting together with your colleagues, sitting together with your product owner, then making some discussion and making some brainstorming with this given when then keywords, the properly written scenario. This is typically hard. So a properly phrased scenario is something which takes some time to write down. It's not so easy to make a quick change. If you realize that it's not there, but somehow else, it's not so easy to refactor those things. And therefore, many teams are started to use some sort of lightweight form of a scenario. Basically, just and this is what we can call an example. So we can say that the examples are a lightweight form of describing the scenario. And if you see these two scenarios on the screen, then you can see that actually, or the scenario and the example on the screen, then you can see that actually they are saying the same, but the example is really just doing it in a very lightweight, sketchy way. And on the other hand, the scenario is more properly written and following the exact syntax of what SpecFlow can process. So that's the difference. And basically, the examples are somewhat introduced improve our discussion, so to be able to provide a way to have some collaboration on how we would like to have our system working. So that's a very important thing. Of course, I was just now saying that examples are a lightweight form of a scenario. That would sound that first was the scenarios and then we developed the concept of examples, but actually in history this was in an opposite order. So the concept of understanding the requirements with the use of examples have been existing far before BDD even was considered. So actually we have reinvented or rediscovered this great technique to be able to have a good conversation about the application. So basically we are discovering the examples, we have a discussion on that, and once this discussion is over, we're finally writing them down properly, which you could call a formulation. That's what you will see is part of the process. But it's very important to highlight that collecting the examples for a user story is not really working like that you are just sitting down maybe with your team and saying that, oh, we have a new user story, let's try to collect a couple of examples for that. So for example, this user story is from a Q&A side, where it says that to avoid posting duplicated questions, as a user I want to get suggestions about similar questions that I'm about to ask. And of course, you could come up with with an example, or you could ask the product owner to provide an example, and maybe they would say that, well, let's imagine that we have two questions already in the system. One was that what is SpecFlow, and the other was what is Cucumber. And if you are just start asking best SpecFlow practices, then basically the system should suggest you the first one, the what is SpecFlow question on the screen. That makes sense, and I think that explains a little bit how this feature is supposed to work. But there is a big problem with that it's very hard to say that, are we ready? Is this all examples that we need, or do we need to collect more examples? How many do we need? And if you just look at such an example, and maybe you haven't been attending that meeting, and if you just look at that example, it might mislead you, because let's say that somebody is just looking at that and say that, it looks like that they were asking best SpecFlow practices, which is 3 words. Does it mean that it has to have at least 3 words? Or maybe not. Maybe this was just a random thing, text that they have collected. And if you just keep creating new examples after the example, the problem will become even more like that. Okay, it's clear that these are very nice examples, that they are useful, but are they complete? And can we move forward now, or are we finished with this meeting? So this is not so easy to answer. And I want to highlight that this problem is not because we have used the lightweight form because we have used these examples, the lightweight form of scenarios. The same problem appears if you do the same with scenarios. And I would like to highlight that, because I think many teams who are practicing BDD are a little bit affected by this problem. So typically these teams have a feature file. In the feature file, there are a couple of scenarios, but you will see that those scenarios doesn't feel that useful, because if you just open the feature file, you see the 5 scenarios and say that, okay, I mean, these scenarios make sense, but what were the requirements really? So these are illustrating something, but we don't know what they are illustrating. And to be able to solve that, or to be able to make these scenarios even more usable and really find their place, there is one more concept that we have to introduce, which we are calling rules, at least in the BDD community. But you will see that rules are essentially the same as acceptance criteria. That's the same concept at the end. So what we are going to do, or what we would like to do, is that we don't want to collect the examples or the scenarios directly to a user story, but we would like to introduce the rules in between. So the user stories will still provide us some sort of high-level goal, but we would like to capture the rules, the requirements, the acceptance criteria to be able to set us the scope. So what kind of rules have to be fulfilled by that? And then if we have the rules, we can find examples for every single rule that are somewhat illustrating that rule and that are providing a better understanding of, for that particular rule. So that makes us that makes the final structure. So actually, we are not only capturing examples and scenarios for the user stories, but we should first find the rules and then come up with a couple of scenarios or examples to be able to fulfill that. You will see that in our demo part as well in practice, and hopefully then it becomes even more clear. So, okay, so that's good. But I would like to get back to the question that why do we need a bridge, especially after seeing this breakdown of story rule example. So why do we need a bridge? And this will be a pretty complex diagram. Sorry for that. I always try to keep it smaller and smaller, but somehow I'm not able to succeed. So let's try to put those things that we have seen so far in the diagram. So user story is definitely on the requirement side, and the rules, these acceptance criteria, which is setting the scope, that's what we said, obviously also on the requirement side. Okay, so that's these are the core input from the requirements point of view. On the application point of view, obviously the most important element is the production code, is the system that we are building. So that's what the developers are producing, hopefully based on the requirements, based on the rules. That. And I think one of the core question of software development is that whenever this production code has been produced, does it implement, or was it really implementing the business rule or not? Okay, that's what we would like to really verify. But unfortunately, this is something that we cannot directly verify. So we have to come up with some extensions to this diagram to be able to do verification. Typically, what teams without BDD would do, or I mean, it's general practice, that to be able to verify the production code, to be able to verify the system, we are making some sort of automated coded test. So maybe an unit test or an unit integration test or whatever. So some sort of thing which is verifying whether the system behaves as we think it's supposed to. But since this is coded test, this is in C# or is some testing tool, it's also sitting in the solution side, and even if you would show that unit test to your business, probably they would not be able to say that whether this test is correct or not correct, because it's in a some sort of cryptic form, at least from their point of view. So unfortunately, this is making a little bit of imbalance in this bridge metaphor. On the other hand, we have seen that it's a generally good practice to come up with examples to be able to have a better understanding of the rule, so that are explaining the rule. As I said, this has happened already before BDD were existing. And if you do that, so if you are really coming up with examples up front, then you are in a much better situation, because when you would like to write your coded test, actually you wouldn't need to just come up with a coded test just from nothing, but you could take those examples and make the test based on that. So you could do that in a way that you just look at one of the examples that you discussed in the preparation meeting and then say that, okay, now I'm making a coded test based on that. That's already better from the balance point of view, because actually the coded test has some relation to the requirement side. But unfortunately, on a long-term maintenance thing, it is basically detached from the example. It's already in C# and you will not be able to test it back. So that's why we need something in the middle that is still connected to the requirements, but formal enough that we can verify our system through that. And this is basically how the scenarios come into the picture. So if you think about that, scenario is somewhat sitting in the middle. It sits in the middle because it illustrates the requirement, illustrates the rule in a business readable form. So I can show my scenarios to my business and they will be able to say that these are valid or not valid. And if you make these scenarios automated, actually the scenario is validating or verifying whether the production code is is really working with that. Obviously, to be able to verify that, we need to provide some automation bits. So we need to provide these step definitions that I mentioned in the beginning that are automating, but only automating the particular steps of the scenario. So, but the scenario itself is a standalone component and a standalone test that is not that is describing the requirements in its own, and therefore basically it makes the connection to both sides. So so that makes at the end the pretty complex picture. But at the end, you will see that right now the scenarios are making the balance, making the connection between the requirement side and the solution side in a way that they can connect to both of them. When we do this with BDD, actually, and I think this is something that we have already mentioned, there are actually 3 different practices that you've done. So first of all, you are doing discovery to be able to come up with an example, and you need to have formulation to be able to write down the scenarios, and of course you will have automation to be able to provide the step definitions. So that was I think my super complex picture. I just have a simpler version of that where I just removed all the things. I just simply say that basically scenarios are verifying the application and validating whether the requirements are somewhat valid. So that's maybe something in a simple form, showing how this bridge metaphor would work. And as I said, so we have the 3 practices: the discovery, about discussing the examples, the formulation to write the scenarios, and the automation that is helping us with turning these scenarios into an automated test. So that was actually our intro part, and basically to make a little refresh or fresh air into our session, let's turn to quiz, and let's make a quiz time.
Cool. So just while I'm presenting this, if everyone wants to grab their devices, so mobile phone if you've got them handy, or you can use your desktop PC, whichever's more convenient for you. And I believe from the last time we ran this, someone mentioned that Mentimeter works better with Google Chrome. Not sure how true that is, but if you have any issues, maybe you can try that. So if you win today's quiz, you're going to receive an Amazon voucher on us. So whoever wins, I'll ask for your details. And the way you join the quiz is if you go to menti.com, you'll be asked to enter this particular code at the bottom here, or you can scan the QR code, and that should take you straight to the quiz start page. So I'll give it a couple of minutes or a minute or so, just so people can join. And if there is any issues, then do shout in the chat, but I suspect that it will be fine. So I will mention, just while everyone's joining, that the answers you give, the points you score will be based on the time that you get to answer them. So if you're faster, you'll get more points. Obviously, there's more risk involved with this, but
yeah, I think you also have to answer correctly, right? So the speed itself is not enough. So
exactly. So you still have to get it right too. So cool. So that should have given everyone a good opportunity to join. So hopefully this will load, and we can see everyone has 88 people have joined. So cool. So let's begin. Have I given enough time, Gáspár? Should we wait a second longer, or do we think that's sufficient?
I think it was good.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's go then. So first question: who defined the term BDD? So we have the man Gáspár himself. Comes from an anonymous contributor, Dan North, or as like Helsoy, is it? Helsoy. There we go. Cool. Time's up. So 29 of you got that one right. So
it's so nice. There's so many people thought that it was me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, it wasn't me, but yeah, Dan did that great job. Yeah.
Cool. So we should get a table here to show us who is on top. Cool. There we go. Dimitro, maybe. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but you were the fastest. You've scored the most points. So let's see if you can hang on to that lead. So question 2, here we go. So which of the following is not part of the 3 key BDD practices?
Which is not part.
Discovery, defenestration, formulation, and automation. This picture makes me laugh every time. Funny.
Oh,
cool.
That was
good. Yeah,
good. Be peaceful. Don't throw anyone out the window. That's what defenestration is.
Love that one. Good. Cool. Moving on. Let's see who's on top. Excellent. So still maintaining the lead there. Good. Let's see if you can hold on. So next question, everyone ready? How many changes did the core SpecFlow project have on its 12th birthday?
Yeah, that's tough, right? You have to guess.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Cool. Well done to 26 people.
Yeah, you know, in all of these key quizzes, it's not the highest, but the one but highest is the right answer.
Cool. Let's see who's in the lead now. Still the same. Well, having a bit of a whitewash here. So see if anyone can topple the leader here. Okay, question 4 or 5. Let's go. So which BDD term denotes a concept similar to acceptance criteria? We've just spoken about this, so hopefully everyone should get this one right.
Yep.
So example test, condition of satisfaction or rule.
Yeah, very nice, very nice, very nice.
Cool.
Obviously, condition of satisfaction is also related, but it's not a BDD term. Yeah.
There we go. Cool. So 40 of you managed to get the one right. Let's see who is winning. Aha, we have a new
change.
Leader. MC. Right. So last question. So make sure you're ready. What is the name of the commonly used workshop technique used for BDD discovery? Coffee machine technique, scenario stroming, BDD time, or example mapping?
Yeah, scenario storming, yeah.
I'm going to blame Andy for that.
Very nice, very nice. So this is what we are going to talk in the second half of the workshop, but it's good that many of you have heard about that or made a good guess.
Yeah, well done, everyone. So let's see who will be taking the voucher away today.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, perfect. So obviously you haven't put your name here. So whoever you may be, please could you send me an email and I'll put the mailbox in the chat so you can see. Just so I can then get in touch with you regarding. So I will stop even my screen share and I'll offer it back to you, Gáspár.
Okay. So share. Yes. Okay. So that was our quiz time. I hope you enjoyed that and you have a little bit refreshed for our second part. And as you probably remember from our agenda, the next thing or the next topic that I wanted to share today is about the BDD process. And I was somewhat highlighted that it is with a kind of case study. I mean, it's not a real case study, but it's a demo application case study. And in this case study, I would like to guide you through an implementation of a user story, implementation of a small little feature, and basically we will go through the different items in this diagram, and whenever we are there, I will explain more about that. I will do a demonstration, but unfortunately I'm alone here in this room, and therefore I will not be able to perfectly demonstrate every single thing, because software development is a team sport. So to be able to make the things better understandable or better imaginable, basically I have some icons, and you see those icons on the right hand side. So, and whenever I'm talking about a particular step in the process, I will always have these icons on one of the corners. So you will say that this particular activity that I'm talking about is done maybe by the product owner, by developer, tester, maybe a whole team on some pairing, or so you can always imagine that who should be doing or who can be doing that particular activity. To be able to help me with that, we have a sample application that I'm going to use. Actually, the sample application is a simple Q&A site where people can post questions and answers, or ask questions and post answers. So from the logo and from the name, you might feel that it's similar to something that you have heard about. Probably that's just a coincidence. So that's Stack Overflow, nothing to do with anything else, but it's a simple application right now that just helps us to demonstrate these things. The application itself is on GitHub. It's open source, and feel free to have a look. Jordan will paste the link, but obviously you can check it out later. It's a sample application implemented with BDD. Feel free to play with that. Maybe you can test your different concepts, different things that you want to do with SpecFlow with that. And of course, if you just find some problem or suggestion to improvement, send me a pull request, just like with any other open source project. So that's how it is. So let's see how that looks. And this will be the point where I will turn to my Visual Studio. And as I highlighted in the beginning, for the today's session, you will not need coding skills. So maybe you will see a few lines of code, but definitely this is more just for illustration, and you don't really need to be able to fully familiar with that. So the application, and I hope that it's still running. As I said, it's a simple Q&A site. Maybe it has stopped, in the meanwhile. So, but now it is going to come back. Perfect. So it's a simple Q&A site where you can ask questions, where you can post some answers, or just vote some others answer. Just need to log in to be able to do some voting. So you can vote different things, or you can post another answer. So pretty much the basic things that you can do in such a Q&A site. From the technology point of view, I don't want to go too much deep into that on Wednesday, on the third day. We will see that a little bit more in detail. Basically, this is a simple ASP.NET MVC application, and it has some test projects as well. Particularly, we have a long name specs project, which contains quite many feature files, as you can see already, and we also have a unit test project as well. And as you see, currently all of these tests are passing, so the application is pretty much in a good, healthy state. Everything looks fine. So that's about our application, and let's go back to the process that we want to do. So as I mentioned, we would like to implement, or I would like to show you how to implement a sample user story, sample features in this website. And whenever you are implementing something new in your own project, in your own system that you are working on. Typically, there are some agile practices or Scrum things that you can do. Typically, there's a product backlog, and the product backlog is somehow containing multiple different user stories to be considered. And at some point, somebody, typically the product owner, is deciding that what should be the next user story to be dealing with. And once they have decided that what should be the next user story to deal with, let's just not rush away. So in my case, let's say that my product owner has picked up a story, and the story is called question suggestions. And we have seen some traces of that. That's basically probably pretty clear. So basically this user story has a background. So let's imagine that that this is a very most wanted feature because we have so many duplicates in the live system of our Q&A site, and actually we would like to make sure that with these suggestions people are not making duplicated posts. And our concept is that right now we would like to make something which is very simple. Of course, these suggestions could be super complicated and AI and whatever else. But right now we just want to have some initial simple version to be able to see how much this has an impact of the number of duplicates we have. And then, of course, later on we can make it much more sophisticated. And we also have a kind of very rough concept for that. And our concept for that is that initially, or so that we identify the related questions by the same words that are used. So if the same word is used in two different questions, that we consider them somewhat related. That's what we imagined as a high-level thing. Obviously, this makes sense, hopefully, as a high-level concept, as a high-level goal. But to be able to hand this knowledge over to the team and make it really a work item that the team can work on, we have to make some discussions. And this has, again, the need for that kind of discussion is not really related to BDD. Typically, every team has meetings like a story refinement meeting, backlog grooming meeting, sprint planning preparation meeting. There are many names for that, but actually all of them are for discussing the details of the user story and making an agreement on how we really want to do that, how we really want to implement that particular user story. And this is what normally the entire team is somewhat participating. And let's see how this would look like if we do it in a BDD style. To be able to do it in a BDD style, you remember that we wanted to build up this structure of stories, rules, and examples. And at the end, what we would like to have from this discovery session is to have examples. But we said that to be able to find examples, first we need to fix the rules. We don't have the rules yet. So maybe this is something that the product owner should be prepared for. So before this meeting actually happens, probably the product owner should sit down, maybe discuss with the analysts, discuss with some users, and try to lay down some rules that are based on the background, the concept, the high-level goal, and basically those rules will represent the contract between the product owner and the team. So these are the things that we want to have implemented. And if you are preparing such a requirement workshop, then the best practice is that you have an initial set of rules. It can happen that during the workshop we might need to change the rules or maybe extend them, but at least an initial set of rules are definitely useful. So in our case study, in our use case or our story, let's say that I'm the product owner and start to think about it. Okay, I have this user story. Tomorrow is going to be the meeting with the team. So I would need to think about and I would need to fix what are those things that I want to have in this release, in this user story be implemented. And probably the first thing that I think that, okay, so definitely if this will make sense, if the questions with at least one common word are suggested. So that's the first rule that comes to my mind, that we should list all of those questions that are having at least one common word, and that could be a good starting point. And generally, when I say common word, that means that these words should be matched in not only in title but also in the body and maybe in the tags as well. So that's something that I also want to have. I know that in English there are many common words like is or and or something. Obviously, if two questions have both have and inside, that shouldn't be considered as related. So we need to implement some sort of filter that filters out this common English word. And obviously, the things that are more related, so have more common words, should be listed earlier, so that they're basically something about the ordering of that particular list would be also useful. Maybe there would be many other ideas that I could have, but that sounds like an initial version. If we will have an implementation that fulfills these 4 rules, I think then we are good to go, and at least for our alpha user set, we could show this feature and get feedback whether we are the right track. So that was my preparation thing. Now let's say that it's tomorrow, and our session is starting, and actually our discovery session, our refinement session that we are going to do, will follow a technique which is called example mapping. And this example mapping is a kind of interactive, collaborative requirement workshop, or it's a workshop facilitation technique itself. You don't need to make a new kind of workshop, so it's still the same old story refinement meeting that you anyway had. You are doing it somewhat differently. Example mapping is a very useful technique. It's not a must-have technique in BDD, and you can do some alternatives as well. But definitely, if you would like to get more practice on how to come up with examples, that's definitely something useful to try. The idea of example mapping was coming from Matt Wynn. His initial article is still on the web, so if you just search for example mapping, and Jordan will also paste the link probably to the chat window. He has a very nice, good summary of that. If you have our BDD Discovery book, then we are also talking about that in detail. But just for now, in a very nutshell, you can say that an example mapping workshop got the name from the result. The result is an example map. It's an example map, but you shouldn't think about a very complex map structure. It's basically a 2-dimensional set of different cards, where on the horizontal axis we have the rules. In this example, we have just 4 rules, just like in our example was. And for each rule, we are coming up with a couple of examples that we are just putting underneath the different rules, and that makes a map. So there is no, it's a simple thing. Even though that is simple, basically with this arrangement, it's very helpful because it's much easier to have an overview of how far we are with the discussion. Did we discuss all of the things, or there are something remaining? You will see in my demo. Obviously, sometimes we are running into some questions that we cannot answer. And obviously, if we cannot answer that, we cannot put them into an example. We're just capturing them in another card. In this case, this pinkish, reddish, I don't know what color it is really, but that could be the question cards. So this is what we are going to do. My product owner has prepared with these 4 rules. Maybe they even shared it with the team. And now in the meeting, we are sitting together virtually or physically, and our goal in this meeting is to go through these 4 rules, make sure that we are all understanding the 4 rules in the same way as the product owner, and see if you have any questions or any additions needed to that. And usually we are doing it in a way that we are asking someone to be the facilitator of the today's meeting. It could be always a different person. It doesn't have to be a very fixed role. And then the facilitator can help that we really follow this the technique as you wish. Right now, I'm anyway alone, so I'm also going to be the facilitator, let's say. So if I would be the facilitator, I would say that, hey team, it's great that you are here. Let's discuss these rules. And let's make sure that we are understanding them in the same way. And let's just start with the first one. Anyway, it's probably a good introduction rule. So it says question with at least 1 common word should be suggested. And our product owner is also with us. So, hey, product owner, could you please give us just one example for that, just that we make sure that we are understanding it in the same way. And the product owner says that, yeah, sure. I mean, that's easy. Just imagine that you have 2 questions already in the system. One is what is SpecFlow, other is what is Cucumber. If you just start to ask, let's say, best SpecFlow practices, since it has the word SpecFlow in it, basically the first question, the what is SpecFlow, is going to be suggested. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. We are just basically simply writing down what the product owner said, and we have our first example. Typically for one rule, we are collecting 1, 2, 3 examples. These are the usual numbers. Basically, it just follows the team discussion. So once we have the first example, typically there are some questions from the team that we can reflect on. So in this case, someone is saying that, hey, oh, that's all good because right now this particular guy was asking the question with the same capitalization of SpecFlow as the original one was. But what would be the thing if they would write it with all caps? Do we still want to suggest the question number 1? Oh yeah, that's a good question, says the product owner. Obviously, yeah, it should be case insensitive. Let's just catch up another example, which is showing that. So this example looks this. So we have one question, what is SpecFlow? But somebody's asking best SpecFlow practices with all caps. This question is still suggested. So that's all good. Okay, now it looks like that we have a good understanding. So now we can move on to the next rule. But while we are about to move to the next rule, someone says that, well, I mean, SpecFlow is super popular. There are 27 million downloads on NuGet, so there will be quite many SpecFlow questions. So can it happen that somebody is asking such a common question and then you will have thousands of suggestions? Will it have an impact on our performance, or is it really a good idea? The product owner says that, okay, what do you suggest? Well, maybe we should just limit the number of results. Maybe we just limit the number of suggestions to like 10. I mean, if you have more than 10 anyway, people will ignore the others. Okay, that's a good idea. And actually, as a result, we were just writing up a new rule. Okay, as you remember, I said earlier that we had the initial rule set, but it can turn out that during the discussion, it turns out that we have forgotten about something, or we want to clarify that, and for that we need a new rule. Can happen. But then we move on. Let's say that we are finding some examples, how to find it in the title, body, and the tags. We are trying to find some example how to filter out some common English word. So in our example, the is word is included in many different questions, but the one with the cucumber is not suggested because the only common word is the is and the what actually, and those are not really useful. So this is all good. And everyone is happy about that. Of course, we know that for that we need a dictionary of these common words, but we'll arrange that later. That's more of a solution problem. But somebody is asking that, okay, but there are some tricky words like behavior driven, which is sometimes written with a dash, sometimes written with 2 words. So how does the matching rule should be? And let's say that in our team, nobody is so good in grammar that they could make a really good decision. So we just postpone this problem. We just write up a question card for that, and which says that, okay, we need to figure that out later, but we don't want to deal with that right now. So we can move on with the discussion, and slowly we are covering all 4 rules, and we have a good understanding of all of these. Okay, so this is how the meeting looks like. Of course, this was a little bit of funny demonstration because I was alone, but maybe you a little bit got the idea, the rhythm of that, how a team can have a discussion about the requirements with the help of the rules and with the help of the examples. At the end, usually if you have a very solid understanding of the problem, but solid understanding sometimes also mean that it turns out that the user story is actually bigger than you were initially thought. So let's say that in this case, it's visible that, okay, these are all nice rules. We need all of them, but this is not going to fit into our sprint. So we somehow, we would need to split the user story. That's just, again, a common agile technique that you sometimes need to do. But actually, if you did example mapping, or if you did break down your story that way, then splitting the user story is also much easier, because you can just say that, couple of rules together with their examples can be postponed, let's say, to the next sprint. So let's say that in our team, we had this discussion and we just decided that those things are going to be postponed. Those are important. We want to have them, but they just wouldn't fit into this sprint. So we just stick to the first 3 rule for now. And that will be good as an initial feedback. And then we will make it much better in the next sprint. Okay, so that's how it is. I've mentioned that example mapping is a very useful technique, but not the only technique that you can use. Maybe some of you have heard about a technique which is called feature mapping, which is similar to example mapping. That's something that was described by John Ferguson Smart, and these are very, very similar techniques. I don't want to go into the details of that. Now you see just a demonstration of that on the left-hand side. You see an example map. This is the one that we have made. On the right-hand side, you see a feature map, but they are about the same. So if you see a rule on an example map, you can also see a rule on a feature map. If you see an example in an example map, you see an example in a feature map as well, but just is split into multiple cards by the different steps it does. So actually these two things are quite much similar. You can try both and see which one works better. And maybe it's also dependent on the story, whether you need this to separate the different steps. Then maybe feature mapping would be more beneficial. If the steps are more simple themselves, then example mapping would be fine. That's your choice. Both of them are great techniques. So that's where we are. So actually now we have finished with our requirement workshop, and now we have the good understanding and the examples. Then the next thing that we could do as a part of the BDD process is to formulate these examples to BDD scenarios. And whenever we say formulate, we said that if we have one example, we would need to somehow turn that into a nicely readable, properly phrased BDD scenario. I don't want to go too much into the details right now. Tomorrow we will spend the entire day for the details of that, but somehow this is what we produce. How you are doing that, that's an interesting question. As you see from the icons on the left side, typically this is done by a pair of people, so not the entire team, but a pair of people. In many cases, it's the developer and the tester together, but of course, other pairs would work fine as well. And these two people at least should somehow work together to be able to draft out the proper form of a scenario. And one way of doing that, and that's a good call out for the work that the SpecFlow team has done, is that they have produced a nice Gherkin editor. It's basically an online Gherkin editor that you can use to share on your screen and just draft out scenarios. So that's what we could maybe use. Of course, there are plenty of other ways of that. So it shouldn't be done by a single person. It's typically done by a pair of people. That's what I mentioned, and usually this pair can do the things alone. Sometimes you need further input and feedback from other members, but that's more of a rare case. Yeah, let's see a demonstration. So, I mean, it will be a kind of pre-made demonstration, but anyway. So what you see on my screen is this online Gherkin editor. As you can see, this is a nice little editor in your browser. I can log in with my Microsoft credential or some other credentials as well. I can have multiple editing files open. I can save them. I can share them. I can do many other things. And what I did, I just copy pasted the first example that I had on my card in its own form, and I also put the rule that was related to that. You see now the rule as a Gherkin keyword. That's not so well known because it just started to be supported in the recent versions of SpecFlow, but that's a valid keyword in Gherkin. And basically, you can use to group the different scenarios to the different rules they are supporting. So the first example was that we have these two questions. You remember, and if I'm asking the best SpecFlow practices, then the first one should be suggested. And this is the one that I would need to transform or formulate into a scenario, and I can just use the keywords. I don't know why we have so many times the scenario outline in the, but anyway, so I just turn it into a scenario, and the questions probably I would just turn into a given step and phrase it like that. I will not do the typing. You can imagine how this would work. So probably I would turn this this initial part into a given with some data tables that are showing what kind of questions we have, and I just continue with the rest until I have a properly written scenario. Of course, I can also fix the formatting as well, and if I'm happy with that, then I can just copy this feature file and put it into my code base. Sorry, just did the wrong thing. So put it into my code base, which means that whenever I have my solution with the with my feature files, then I can just make a new feature file, new item, and somewhere in the SpecFlow we have a feature file for SpecFlow template, and this is going to be question suggestions .feature. That's all good, and actually I can just paste the scenario that I have created and discussed with my team members. So that's how I could move on with that. Good. So once we have formulated the scenarios, we can move on with that. But I think a very good question would be that we were coming up with, I think, 4 or 5 different examples. So how should I do? Should I formulate all 5 and then start doing the automation, or shall I just formulate only one and then trying to automate that? It's very hard to answer that generally. My general suggestion would be that try to take, definitely I wouldn't formulate all of the scenarios, because typically after the automation of the first scenario, you might realize that a little bit of different phrasing would have been better, or some smaller changes might be required. Usually what I do, I either just take one scenario or one example and turning it into a single scenario, or maybe just I take the scenarios of the first rule. That would also work. So that's maybe a good practice. Yeah, I would say definitely I wouldn't just formulate all, maybe just for very known topics. So if you are very confident about the phrasing. In this case, what I did, I formulated the first 2 scenarios. You remember that there was the one that where we wanted to search for the SpecFlow practices, and the other where we were searching for the capital case SpecFlow practices. And obviously they are very, very similar. And if you have a little bit more experience with Gherkin, you would immediately start turning it into a scenario outline. That's all good. You can do that. I usually don't like to do that immediately. I just like to have it separated as long as I don't have the automation and the implementation finished. I just made a to-do there that at some point, whenever this is getting to be close to ready, then I will merge this into a scenario outline. Anyway, you will see more about that tomorrow. So whenever the scenario has finished and we have saved these things to a feature file, that this feature file becomes the single source of truth. So they are typically put into the source control. You can put it into Git. Everything is versioned. Every version is traceable, and you can also check how the specification was changing. And actually the best practice, even though that is not always possible, is to version them together with the production code. So it's basically putting it into the same Git repository, so that whenever you check out a repository with a set of tests, you immediately know which set of or which version of the production code it should actually work. So that's definitely recommended. It's not always possible, but if you can do that, that's definitely a great thing. The other thing, just to mention that whenever you have created the initial version of your scenarios, obviously they are not going to be passing. So because we haven't implemented anything for that, so they are going to be failing in some way. And this failure might be a problem because on the build server, you get the fake errors that you don't want to see. To be able to avoid that, a good practice is to tag these scenarios with a specific tag. I usually use the formulated tag to indicate that these are not ready to execute yet. And basically then on the build server, you can just filter them out with a simple expression. Like, for example, in case of MS test, you would need to provide a test category not equal formulated filter criteria, and then basically they would be excluded from the execution. Obviously, you shouldn't forget to remove the formulated when you are done. And at this point, these scenarios that we have created are having some so-called undefined steps. So basically, that means that we don't know how to, or SpecFlow doesn't know yet how those steps should be automated. And this is going to be our next step to do. In the execution result, I will not do that in a demo. Basically, you would see them with a different color, so that typically with the exclamation mark. That's not really a failing outcome. That's an undefined outcome, which is basically telling you that there is a scenario that is not ready yet or not complete yet. You need to come up with some automation code to make it fully complete. Okay, so we have finished with the formulation. We have put that into the source control. Depending on your team setup, before you actually start automating those scenarios and start implementing your production code, you might want to ask your product owner or maybe your teammates for review. This is something that you have to make a decision about. So some teams do a mandatory review for all of the scenarios. Some teams are just asking for review if there is some unsure thing. Some teams are asking a review from all of the team members. Some teams are asking the review only from the product owner. Some teams are working in a way that the one who were just formulating just quickly set up an online call with their product owner, and just the product owner just looks at that and gives feedback about that. Hopefully, if in the requirement workshop everyone was together, hopefully in that case the formulation didn't show up too much surprises. So usually the formulations should be straightforward from that perspective. But sometimes you need to ask feedback from others. This is something that you can decide on your own. I mean, with your team, obviously. If this is done, then basically now we have a set of scenarios formulated that are ready to work. So this means that we can move on to the next step, and we can automate the scenarios here. So to be able to do that, you see that I have pasted the scenario here, and you see that this is showing me with some different color that these particular steps are undefined. So basically I need to provide some automation logic for that. And to be able to do that, the Visual Studio extension from SpecFlow, this is something that I will mention more in detail on Wednesday, providing me some helper tools for that. For example, there is a define steps command, which is basically telling me that, hey, in this file, there are 2 undefined steps. And if you would like to, then it generates me even a class which is containing the starting points of the automation logic for that. Basically 2 placeholder, 2 skeleton methods where I would need to fill that out with my automation logic here. So so that would be the next step that I would do. I will not do much coding here because that would be first of all will be too slow, and it would involve too much of coding. So what I do instead, I'm just basically resetting my demo to be able to have the things, which is not working as I wanted. What did I do wrong? I will just see in just a second. Yeah, sometimes the Visual Studio things are not working that clearly. So basically now the steps are all defined, and I have lost my window with my demo script. That's perfect. So the automation has been done for my demo. Sorry for that. It's a little bit tricky to do online demos, obviously. On a disappeared. Okay. So because I was setting it to the wrong starting point, and this was causing all the troubles. I knew that it should work, but of course it wasn't. Anyway. Good. So basically it is now automated. I have used some automation technique. I don't want to go too much into the details. We'll talk about that on Wednesday, but somehow I provided some automation for my scenarios, and my automation is a kind of complete, but I did my automation in a way that even though that it even created some business related or the production related classes like this automation suggestions controller, which is going to be the main logic. I haven't implemented that really. So if you know C#, then you see what I'm doing here. Basically, I'm just returning an empty list. So my suggestions are currently always returning an empty list, so never returning any kind of suggestions. But that's just enough to be able to have into some compilable state. So I can now run my scenarios. And basically, when I run my scenarios, I should see a failure of this of the new step definition or the new feature file that I just created, and it would say that, hey, if you would look at the error message somehow in detail, it would say that, hey, you would expecting that you see the what is SpecFlow as a suggestion, but you haven't, but it wasn't provided. That's what this minus is telling me about. And obviously the same with the case insensitive way for that. So basically right now, if you think about some test-driven approach, then right now what we have an automated scenario, and to be able to provide the and it shows now as a failing test, and to be able to provide the implementation for that, I would need to implement my production code to be that it fulfills those scenarios. In order to implement those scenarios, I mean, probably providing such a suggestion list is not a very complex thing, but probably I would need to make new methods, new classes, and some inner structure for that. And since this is a pure software development job that I need to do here, I could use the help of unit testing and test-driven development to be able to support my implementation. So probably if I would be the developer who would need to fulfill this scenario, the first thing that I would do, I would kick off a test-driven development process. That means that I would come up with a couple of unit tests that are telling me how I would like to structure my code, what kind of classes I want to create, how those classes should work, and basically slowly through them I should be able to implement my logic. As long as my unit tests are not fulfilled, I can move on to further unit tests, further fulfilling those unit tests, and at the end, if I would do all of these, and I would all of my unit tests would be turning to green, then finally there will be a point when I'm just running my unit tests. Let's see. So I'm running my unit tests. Now all of those tests are green, so it means that my implementation is fulfilling all my own technical expectations. And suddenly it looks like that my scenarios, if I did everything fine, are also implemented and turning to green. Of course, I would need to also check whether the user interface is working correctly, but with that, basically, I concluded the implementation section. So you see what happened. So I formulated a couple of scenarios. I provided the automation first for them. I handed this over to myself as a developer. I was using test-driven development to be able to implement that chunk of work, and at the end, we were basically able to turn these scenarios to green. Actually, here in the diagram, you see some sort of supplementary testing, which is just a generic category. But basically, what you can say that at this point, I can already start doing some sort of testing. Maybe load testing wouldn't be practical yet, but some exploratory testing could be done already at this point, which would mean that I would need to just compile my application and start. Let's see how it works in my project. So ask a question and try to type something like "Hello SpecFlow," and hopefully, if I did that well, then I should see that the suggestion already appeared in my website. So it looks, and of course, I could play with that a little bit more, whether this casing is also working well, and I could try with different variations of that, and basically with a little bit of exploratory testing, I could make sure that I'm really going at the right track. So we are here, but actually, if you remember, we have created 4 different examples, and we only have formulated 2 of them. So this inner loop cycle is moving forward. So I would need to formulate further scenarios. I will not do them in detail, but just move on to that. So now all of the scenarios are somewhat formulated. So now you can see that I have this words should be matching in different things, and I also have the is verification. I have already turned that into a scenario outline. So again, I have 2 additional scenarios that would be undefined in the beginning, and then I would need to make the automation for them, like we did, and actually finally implement those user stories as well. Again, for me now it's easy because I can just move my my implementation to that. But of course, in reality, that would mean a lot of sweat and tears until you again come into a stage where all of your tests are passing. Maybe you need to increase the set of unit tests, and of course now we have more scenarios as well to be able to see. And again, the cycle ends. We could make some supplementary testing. Again, we could run the application, try out different things. As now we have finished all of the examples for this user story, actually we could also make some security testing, load testing, or any other kind of testing that we would like to perform to be able to get the right quality. And yeah, at the end, we can just say release. Obviously, when we say release, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are releasing it to the production. You have seen that, especially when we split the user story into small, maybe at this stage, I don't want to really release this application to production, but maybe I could release it to some demo environment or staging environment where further testing can be done, or I can show it with some alpha users or beta testers or whoever else can provide further feedback to the user story. And then, of course, we could move on to the next user story and continue the cycle like that. Basically, at this point, we can say that the user story is done. And it's a good definition of done. Maybe you have seen teams who were just saying done when the implementation is finished, but the testing is typically lagging behind. Those teams are usually introducing a done when it's not only implemented, but also tested. Actually, I was once working with a team who even introduced the done. You don't want to be in that position. So there is only one done, and this is where we are right now. So that's what we did. That was the BDD process, basically just to give a very high level review, especially those areas where that we have influenced with BDD. So actually, one thing that we did differently is that whenever this handover of the requirements were done, we were trying to come up with the details with examples. We have formulated those examples into scenarios, and we have automated those scenarios so that we can execute them as automated tests. And that those are basically the key points that are different in a BDD process than in any other process. This process diagram is showing one example. Your process diagram, even with BDD, might be slightly different. Maybe in your case, you are not able to do automation first. You need to delay that. That's an unfortunate thing, but this doesn't break the process itself. It will be just slightly different, and you have to be a little bit more careful with not implementing too much without having tests covered by that. Just take this as an example process, and think about your own process based on that. Good. So basically that concludes our second section. And if you remember from our agenda, basically we have one more section to go, which is seeing BDD in contrast to other different test methods. Many of you are testers, as we have seen from the initial poll, and probably you are doing many different kinds of tests. And with this comparison, I wanted to help you by seeing that how much BDD is different from other kinds of tests, or how much BDD is working together well with other kinds of tests. I will try to make some comments for the most common test methods. If even after this comparison things are unclear, or there is some other test techniques that you would like to ask about, feel free to use the Q&A, and at the end I'm happy to extend whatever I said right now with anything else. So the first one is as I said, so this is the most wanted kind of topic. It comes back very often when I'm talking about BDD, that what is the relation of BDD to TDD, the test-driven development? All of them sound similar. All of them have this driven development kind of thing, and all of them are related to testing. So are they different? Are they the same? How would they be? And first of all, I have to say that it's not so easy to answer this question, because there is no very canonical definition of neither BDD nor TDD. So whenever the things that you are seeing here is considering that kind of TDD meaning, where we are using primarily unit tests to drive the implementation thing, so that when those are programmer tests written by programmers, to be able to make a better solution, that kind of TDD I'm talking about. And I would like to do this comparison similarly to the others, that I would like to list some similarities and differences, and maybe from that we will see some good outcome. So one of the key similarities that are both related to test-driven approach. So they are both test-driven approaches. So test-driven development and test-driven approach is not the same thing. Test-driven approach is a principle, is a generally good idea that you can apply in different ways. And both behavior-driven development and test-driven development are practices that are fulfilling this principle, as you have probably seen also in the process thing. The other thing which is definitely similar, that both of them are supported by automated tests. Obviously, test-driven development is typically supported by automated unit tests. BDD is supported by automated SpecFlow scenarios in our case, and both are very useful agile practices. They are absolutely not comparing or competing with each other. These are actually independent practices. BDD can be used theoretically without TDD, but it's just generally better to use it together with TDD. So they really work fine with each other. So what are the differences? So the key difference is that they have different target, and when you think about behavior-driven development, then typically the scenarios that we write with BDD, those are ensuring the functional quality. I said in the morning that these are the business requirements. The business functional requirements are the ones that we are targeting. So in the testing terminology, they're actually functional tests. The test-driven development, on the other hand, is more primarily about ensuring the technical excellence, so that what you are writing is really behaving how you wanted to have that behave. So they are programmer tests from that perspective. Of course, sometimes they are also checking the functionality, but they are primarily testing whether your technical implementation is properly working. So because of that, the typical expectations that we are expressing with the different kind of technologies are also different. So with BDD, we are expressing external expectations. That means that if I'm automating or I implementing a BDD scenarios, are basically I need to fulfill the expectation of someone else, in our case, the team's expectation or the product owner's expectation. For TDD, the expectations are internal. So I write the test for myself and I fulfill that test myself. So some people says that because of this internal expectation nature of TDD, the TDD things that you are writing there, they are not really tests because you are self-testing. It's quite different from than the testing an external expectation. So if you think about that, you will see that it's much different. If you see a green TDD test, that means that I did my job right. If you see a green BDD test, that means that I did the right job. So if that helps. So in summary, we can say that they are different, but they are working well together. And as I said, they are both test-driven approaches. And while the well-known TDD cycle looks like that red-green refractor, which means that you are writing a failing unit test, fulfilling the unit test, so working just as little, that turns that unit test to green, and then you refactor the code to make it clean and better maintainable long-term. Actually, the BDD cycle works very similarly, as you have seen also in my demo. So you start with a failing scenario. Now you would need to turn that failing scenario to a passing scenario by implementing the production code. But since in this case the production code is a bigger chunk of work, typically you can support that by creating multiple small unit tests. So there is an inner TDD loop inside, and you will probably make a couple of unit tests until the thing is passing. But of course, even if you have a passing scenario, it makes sense to think about any kind of refactoring, cleaning up your production code, cleaning up your test code, so that it will be better maintainable long term. So that was the BDD TDD comparison. The next important comparison that I want to mention is the BDD versus the automated functional regression testing, so other kind of automated functional tests. And again, doing it the same way, similarities and differences. So definitely the most important similarity is that they are both targeting the functional quality. We said that for BDD, and of course for functional automated regression testing, that's absolutely true, that they are both functional quality. They are also similar that those BDD scenarios are, once they have been automated and once the code is done, basically the BDD scenarios also become part of the automated functional regression test. So basically, whatever you did in BDD, that will be also working as a functional automated regression test as well. So it's a kind of subset kind of thing, if that helps. So BDD is definitely a subset of the functional automated regression test. Because they are both functional automated tests, of course, some automation logic, some code, some helper classes, some automation helper classes, some page objects, so whatever else you are using, obviously can be shared and used in both. So these are probably the most important similarities. The key difference is this is coming from this subset nature. So when we talk about BDD scenarios, then we can say that you have seen how the process is. So we are sitting together, coming up with a bunch of examples, turning those examples into BDD scenarios. Definitely when we are coming together, just imagine the entire team is there, like 7 people is there. Definitely when we are having that valuable time, when we are all together, we don't want to build up a full coverage of the problem. Actually, our goal at that time is not really coverage. Our goal at that time to have a good illustration of the requirements that can be used to drive the implementation. That's why it's called driven thing. So of course they are going to be regression tests at the end, but that's not our primary goal. And at the end, it can happen that you will need some additional regression tests that were not required as an illustration, that were not required as a specification. So maybe there is a set of tests that are dropping out from BDD, and you need to have further tests, further functional automated tests to reach your expected coverage. So maybe there is a bug regression test, or maybe some edge case testing, or whatever else you want to have. Technically, for this additional functional automated test, you could also use SpecFlow, and you could use the same Gherkin thing, because if it's already there, why not reuse that? But definitely highlight in the feature file, maybe put them into a separate feature file, or at least use a separate tag for that whoever is reading your feature file, they should be clear that what are those scenarios that has to be read to be able to understand what this feature is about. And what are those scenarios that can be read if you want to know what kind of test cases that we have additionally wanted to provide for that? So they are subset of each other, and yeah. So BDD is a subset of functional regression tests, and those subset which is focusing on the specification, focusing on the understandability. Okay, so we have seen TDD is a good extension to BDD. Functional automated regression testing is a good extension, or might be a good extension to BDD. Let's move on to the third one, and which is the manual regression testing. So how does BDD relate to manual regression testing? Again, let's see the similarities. Both are targeting the functional quality, obviously. Both are somewhat prescribed, so scripted. We tell upfront what we are going to test, and both can be used to catch the regression issues. So those are definitely true. And also we can say that both needs different test actions, steps to be completed, so that we can say that our test is finished. So those are the similarities. But on the other hand, there are quite key differences as well. So it sounds a little bit weird, but I would say that the cost factors of these different kind of tests are somewhat different. For manual test, if you think about what is the highest cost factor, then obviously you will see that the human execution cost is the most important. Somebody needs to sit there. If it's a regression test, then they need to sit there multiple times and redo the same test again and again and again and again. That's the highest cost. On the other hand, for BDD and generally for automated tests, it looks like that the implementation of the automation of those tests and the ongoing maintenance of those tests are the highest cost factor. Of course, you need to pay something for the CPU as well, but definitely the implementation and maintaining costs are much higher than the execution costs in general. So because of this, or maybe related to that, the verification options are also somehow different. So if you are considering a manual test, then obviously humans are very good in watching multiple things. So they can typically check as many things as they can do while they are going through the test script. On the other hand, because of the maintenance, to reducing the maintenance cost for automated BDD tests, they are typically better if they are only checking one thing. Okay, so it checks one thing. Manual regression test is typically checking many things on the route. So somehow also related to that, the general test flow is different. Again, manual tests, because of starting up a manual test and going through them is a costly effort. Typically, you are chaining those things up into a longer user journey. So typically, manual testers are going through a longer thing. While in BDD, we are typically focusing one single business rule, checking one little thing, and that produces multiple smaller tests. So that's probably the key difference. Is what comes out of that, and we will talk more about that tomorrow, that unfortunately manual test scripts are typically cannot be transcripted or converted to one scenario. So from one manual test script, if you want to get rid of that and you want to turn that into BDD, typically you cannot just make one single scenario out of that. You need to do a little bit more analysis and probably produce multiple scenarios. You will see an example for that tomorrow. So that's a key difference, and they are actually addressing different things. The third thing that I wanna mention, and this is the one before the last, that how BDD relates to exploratory testing. I hope that many of you have heard about exploratory testing. It's a great testing technique, and Elizabeth Hendrickson's Explore It book is a very good source for learning for that. So basically, they are generally both BDD and exploratory testing are agile testing techniques, and they both can at least target functional quality. Of course, exploratory testing can target other quality aspects as well, but in many cases they are targeting functional quality as well. The difference is mainly the method. BDD is more like a prescribed way of testing, so we know upfront what kind of things we want to check, while exploratory testing is more like a guided exploration, so we don't know exactly what we are going to check. We have a goal that we would like to verify the application from this and this aspect, and yeah, it's a guided exploration. Because of that, the target is slightly different. As we mentioned, both of them are targeting the functional quality, but exploratory testing can target many other things, operational quality, things like usability, security, robustness, convenience, whatever you want to say. For those teams who have built up a very good BDD test suite with good scenarios, they usually find that exploratory testing is a very good extension to the BDD process. So exploratory testing can catch exactly those areas where it would be hard to check or how to reach with automated tests. So that's a good combination. So we have seen TDD, BDD, good combination, BDD exploratory testing, good combination, BDD additional functional test is a good extension to that. And last but not least, obviously there is a lot of other ability testing, performance, security, which I was saying supplementary test. Someone was once saying that this supplementary test sounds a little bit degrading, but I don't want to say anything bad about these. So these are just supplementary from the viewpoint of the BDD. Otherwise, they are very, very important, sometimes even much more important than the BDD scenarios that we write, especially if you think about security, for example. So again, the similarities, so they are both contribute to quality. They both can be used as a verification technique, which is verifying whatever we have, or a supporting technique, which is helping you to guide the right thing from the beginning. Of course, for this supplementary tests, this supporting thing is not that trivial, so you need to be tricky for that. But there are also some differences as well. So, and I think the primary difference is the target. Supplementary testing are typically addressing this operational quality, and BDD is for the functional quality. BDD is mainly used as a supporting technique, which is guiding the development. So it's not so much of not primarily used as a verification technique, but more as a guiding technique, while supplementary tests are typically used as a verification technique. So that means that you are doing your application, you are finished, and then we can verify whether there is no security issues, for example. The form of the testing might be different. So for supplementary testing, typically these tests are described in a specific tool. For example, if you think about performance tests, like Gmeter is a very commonly used tool, where BDD we are describing the tests in a business readable language, the Gherkin format that we have seen. So basically, the bottom line of that is that they are addressing different aspects of quality. Again, a good extension of each other. So, and with that, basically, we got to the end of this section. So this is what we have seen. So we have seen that BDD contributes to to the functional quality, but BDD is not the only way of testing. TDD can help with the technical excellence. Functional automated regression testing can extend the coverage. Manual regression testing can be replaced by BDD, but definitely not in a one-one style. Exploratory testing is typically a good extension for BDD, and supplementary tests are focusing on the other operational quality things. So that basically concludes at the end our third section. And since we had only 3, actually that also means that we are close to wrap up the today's lesson. So let's see what kind of things we have seen. So these were the topics that we went through. What is BDD, the BDD process, the case walkthrough, and the BDD and other test methods. And these are the kind of key facts that I would like you to take with you. So BDD is composed of 3 practices: the discovery, formulation, and automation. Examples are helping to better understand the requirements. Very useful to make sense to practice that. The story rule example breakdown makes the requirements much more manageable. And don't forget to document also the rule. So whenever you write it down to the feature file, use the rule keyword and also capture what rule that particular scenario was actually implementing or illustrating. We have seen example mapping as a workshop facilitation technique, and we mentioned that discovery can be done by the entire team. That's most useful because that's how the knowledge handover works the best. And on the other hand, for formulation, typically the entire team is not necessary. It can be much more efficiently done by a pair of people, maybe a dev and a tester. And in general, if you really want to get the most benefit of BDD, then automation should precede the implementation. Sometimes it's not possible to do that, but if you can, then that's definitely providing you a couple of benefits. And last but not least, it's very important to highlight that BDD is primarily not for testing. However, it typically fits very well to your testing strategy. Yeah, so that was my part. Thank you very much. And it's great that we have quite good time for Q&A. So hopefully we are going to be able to answer the most of the questions.
Yeah, there's quite a few questions, so that's good that we've got a bit of extra headroom there. So I'll suggest you could continue to share, Gáspár, just in case you need to use your PC to help.
Makes sense.
Yeah, if that's okay. And I'll just start from the top. So cool. So question number 1. And as I'm going through these, if you could upvote them in terms of your interest, that'd be great. So question number 1 is from Ravi, is when to use BDD and when not to use BDD?
It's very hard to answer this question. So I think BDD provides benefit in many different contexts. So I have used now in various different projects, and I have found it useful. So when not to use BDD, that's a hard question. So my usual answer for that, but even that one is not fully true, that definitely BDD works better if the requirements are more concrete. So for those industries where there is quite much fuzziness in the logic, like game development or some AI related thing, probably in those areas it would be harder to make BDD scenarios. So but I have heard some teams who are doing game development and they do BDD. So as I said, even in that case, it's not fully true. But I think in a classic enterprise business application, that's definitely the most easy target for BDD. And the other thing that I usually mention, it's not about an application kind, but maybe a phase of an application where BDD is not necessarily that practical, is when you do spiking or probing or trying out some concepts. So imagine the case that you are you don't know what is possible, I mean technology wise or whatever else, and then you are just trying out different ideas with the application, of course, with the coordination of the product owner. And since in those cases you don't really have requirements, you just want to explore what is possible. Usually for those times, I typically pause my BDDing and I just do that typically in a separate branch, so I don't even mix it up with the production code. I try different things. I make some design sketches. I make some prototypes to be able to see what is possible. And once this spike is over, so once I got the knowledge that I wanted, then I can go back to my normal BDD mode. And for those requirements that I really want to bring into the core product, I properly do the scenarios and use the implementation that I discovered during the spiking. So those are the two things that comes to my mind. Definitely, there are probably other applications. Maybe if it's just a 2 months one-off project, it will not be used after that. Of course, then probably the quality, ensuring the quality this way is probably not that important anyway. So it's not really BDD. It's more like that, whether you want to make automated tests for those or not.
Cool, thanks, Gáspár. So the next one from Anoop is, will we get any sort of PowerPoint documentation for the session? Yes, you will receive the recordings after the 4 sessions have concluded, along with any links that have been shared to
and
you.
I think we also usually share the PDFs. So I don't know, but yeah, so definitely, I think we also share the PDFs. I mean, it's all fine with me.
Okay, cool. Next question from Manish. How is SpecFlow different than other BDD frameworks? And is SpecFlow.net specific, or is it for other languages too?
Very, very good question. So actually, SpecFlow can be considered as a .NET port of the Cucumber tool. So SpecFlow is part of the Cucumber tool family, and all of the tools in the Cucumber tool family are working very similarly. So whatever you have seen here and whatever you will see in the other days, it's pretty much similar with Cucumber, Cucumber Java, Cucumber JavaScript, or Cucumber Ruby. So basically, they are the difference between let's say Cucumber Java and SpecFlow. That SpecFlow is for .NET and Cucumber Java is for Java. So that's just a different target. There are a few other BDD frameworks that are not part of this Cucumber tool family. They are not that popular. So there are some usages of that. I think in .NET, SpecFlow is pretty much dominating the BDD market. There are other BDD tools as well. For example, in Ruby, you have RSpec, which can be considered as a BDD tool as well. I think for those tools are basically supporting the BDD technique, and any tool could support that. I think the benefits of using BDD or Cucumber, for example, for Java, is the knowledge, so that it will, if you are choosing SpecFlow for your BDD project, then it will be much more easier to hire someone who has some SpecFlow knowledge already. While if you are just making a new BDD framework or just using one which is less popular, then it will be harder to build up the team knowledge about that. So we are very proud of SpecFlow, but SpecFlow is a small little tool. It does its job, and that's it.
Cool. Good sales pitch, like it. So the next question is, and I think this was specific to when you were going through the scenarios, is can we use more than one and?
Yes, we can use more than one and. Tomorrow we will talk about these ands and where we should use ands and where are more dangerous to use ands. But yes, technically you can use as many ands as you want. So yeah.
Thanks, Gáspár. Next one from Evandro. I have seen scenarios written in BDD, however, containing the following structure: given when, then when, then when, etc., etc. Is that approach correct when applying BDD?
It's not correct. If I need to answer in a single sentence, so basically, typically these when then type scenarios are coming when somebody is transcribing a manual test script to BDD. We will see that again much more in detail tomorrow. The problem with those when then scenarios is they are testing too many things, and therefore they will become very, very unmaintainable. That means that they will always turn to red, and not for the right reason. It will be very hard to say if they fail, why they are failing, what is actually wrong with our system. So people will get used to red tests, and if you just CI fails, yeah, that's the usual thing, because we have this couple of long tests that are always failing, or at least there's always a few that is failing. and then you don't, then you are not using the benefits of this automated, the feedback that these tests are providing. So yeah, I recommend you to refactor those tests into multiple smaller scenarios. Tomorrow we will see such a case study anyway.
Cool, thanks, Gáspár. Next one from Sumit is, what is the difference between scenario and scenario context? I've been able to use them interchangeably in my project. Can you please share any example where they can be differently used?
Okay, so these two terms are from different domains. So scenario is the test description that you write into the Gherkin file. Okay, so that's the thing that is describing what to do. That's similar to the test concept. Scenario context is just a helper structure within SpecFlow to be able to access some details about the scenario execution. That's just an automation detail. We will see that definitely on Wednesday. But yeah, so that's the key difference. One is a BDD term in the Gherkin file. The other is more a SpecFlow specific automation related thing.
Yeah, and it's a C# object, isn't it? The scenario context.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Next one is from Ashok. Typically, who writes BDD scenarios? Developers or POs or BAs?
So, as I said, I have tried, but typically, if one person is writing those scenarios, then usually it's going into the wrong track. So I do this now for 12 years, but even after 12 years, and even after having a book written about formulation, if I need to write the scenario alone, then usually I realize later that it was not exactly perfect. So I also go to someone and discuss my scenarios with someone else. So doing it alone, and it doesn't matter your experience, doesn't matter your knowledge, doesn't matter your skills, it's just not getting the right track. So therefore, generally, a pair of people, it's much better, and you will know that, you will see that the knowledge sharing about how your scenarios look like and how they are phrased are definitely compensating a little bit of extra work of working by two people on the scenario. So definitely this is what I would suggest. What is the exact pairing, whether it's the dev and the tester, dev and the PO, or so that's up to you. Generally, what we would like to see is that generally it definitely makes sense to have someone in the pair who knows how the automation is going to work, because otherwise probably you will end up making scenarios that are very hard to automate. So someone should be thinking about how I'm going to automate that, and the other person from the pair should more focus on the business readability thing. That does this still make sense? So I know that it's super easy to automate now, but does it still make sense? And try to find the consensus in between. So that's why the pair of people works. Yeah. So dev test, dev PO, test PO, whatever, those are all good pairs.
Whoever you can get hold of that isn't in a meeting. Cool, thank you. So the next one is from Chris Park. Given Agile generally encourages smaller user stories, do you think there's a danger structuring your scenarios directly from requirements is going to lead to a somewhat fractured set of scenarios over time?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. Could you just repeat once more?
Sure. Given Agile generally encourages small user stories, do you think there's a danger structuring your scenarios directly from requirements is going to lead to a somewhat fractured set of scenarios over time?
Okay, so it's always a problem because when I say a word like requirement, that word means different things to different people. So when I said requirement, and when we said that I guess the question was that if you are deriving the examples from the rules, whether it will be too much fraction. So those rules are not necessarily the same things that you think about requirements. In a maybe something that would help you to understand that, and maybe you can make a follow-up question if it's still unclear, that typically one user story is broken down to 3, 4, 5 rules. Okay, so it's not hundreds of rules, not hundreds. It's sometimes even just 2. And one rule is typically illustrated with 1, 2, 3 scenarios altogether. So from one user story, typically there are 10-ish number of scenarios generated. So it's absolutely manageable. I don't know. I don't know. So of course, the smaller your user story is, the less scenario you will need to create for that. So that's all good. And I think these are working very well together. Making smaller user stories is a good thing, but there is a practical limit that you cannot make it smaller. And this is where this rule breakdown is still helping. I don't know.
Well, thank you. More of a statement from Daniel Dudek, but maybe you can make a comment on it, Gáspár. Based on my experience, and this is based on the teams I've worked with, we didn't tend to use one feature file per story, but rather one feature per epic or initiative, and then scenarios per story.
Yeah, very good. I absolutely agree. And on Thursday, I will say the same. So very good that I didn't want it to go into this discussion today. Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah.
Cool. One from Hemel, is there any way to create test cases in Azure DevOps from SpecFlow scenarios without having to manually create them in Azure DevOps?
I have a small tool for that which can do such thing. If you just Google for SpecSync, it's a commercial tool. So I don't want to promote that too much. It's able to take your scenarios and synchronize them to test cases. That's one thing. And the SpecFlow team has the how is it called, the living doc generator integrated tool, which can put your scenarios into a browsable living documentation in Azure DevOps, and that's even free. So I think those are the options that came to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Or Jordan?
I also wrote one some time ago to overcome an integration challenge in my previous company. But I think yours is probably much better, Gáspár, to be honest. But yes, I also have one too. But yeah, we'll move on. Hopefully that answers your question. So the next question is from Martin. What kind of tools are you recommended to making mapping rules and examples remotely? I think that's...
I see. I generally just use those tools that are allowing me to use virtual post-it. So I personally use Miro, but Mural is also used by many teams. Those are all tools that are working nicely. Before these kind of tools were used, I have used even a shared Excel or a shared Google Sheet, which is basically anyway a tabular format that you can just use the cells as cards. But nowadays I use Miro.
Cool, thank you. Next one is there a shortcut keyboard key to format scenarios in SpecFlow?
Control KD is
Mm-hmm.
So yes. So it depends on the version of Visual Studio extension you are using. Nowadays, I think we recommend to everyone to just switch on to Visual Studio 2022, where we have where we have the extension that you have also seen in my demo. But I think even in the old one, there is the Control key KD. Maybe it works anywhere. Yeah. So just forget about what I said. So Control K and D is the format. But it's the standard format document command of Visual Studio. SpecFlow extension is just hooked on the existing command. So the same works with your C# files as well.
Cool. And another one from Hemel. Rather than using @formulated tag, why not use @ignore tag?
I just don't like the ignore tag. The ignore tag is just generally ignoring that particular tag. The danger with the ignore tag that you cannot so well document the purpose, and maybe that just start to I don't know. I had one project where I burned myself with ignored tests, and then I made a promise that I'm never going to ignore tests anymore. So yeah, maybe that's why. But of course, if you are careful, the ignore would also work well.
Cool, thanks. This one from Sandeep. Is there a general practice how step definitions should be grouped into a file?
Yes, we will talk about that on Thursday in detail, but generally, basically, they should be grouped by the area they are automating. That's what that's what is going to be our final answer for that. But we will see a little bit more examples on that. I think on Thursday.
Cool. Next one from an anonymous person. How do you organize your feature file by feature, story, or domain?
Very good. This is also what we are going to address on Thursday. I don't know what were the options, but basically by feature, so by the areas that they are describing, that should be the primary goal. But what you call a feature, of course, that's an interesting question, because there is no definition of that. So maybe you have sub features or high level epics or something like that. But yeah, that should be the organizational structure. That's why it's called a feature file, by the way.
Thank you. So there's one from Chris Clark. I would say that things like a search not being case sensitive is something best handled by a unit test. With the approach being shown, how do you align the scenarios to the various levels of the testing pyramid?
Well, it's always a hard question. So I don't want to go into the Stack Overflow related business questions, because of course it's an imagined application and it's not real. So that's why we cannot answer that. But I think that could be also a valid. So I can imagine a situation where this is a valid business question. So that it depends on the team and depends on the context. How they are related to the pyramid, that's more of a tricky thing. The exact answer is that obviously these BDD scenarios are more towards the top of the pyramid, but there is no exact match. So the pyramid is talking about a different aspect than the BDD scenarios are. The pyramid is more talking about the costs of automation, and BDD is talking about readability of tests. So they are really bit different in a different dimension. I don't know if we have this in the masterclass. I would need to think it over, but for tomorrow I will double check and send you some references to some slides. So basically, and the other thing that I would suggest, we just don't have enough time for that. Take a look at the sample code, and there you will see the set of unit tests and the BDD scenarios. And I mean, the ratio probably you have anyway seen. So let me just see. So for this question suggestions, I have 4 scenarios, and I have I think 11 unit tests. So that's so definitely it shows that, and maybe of course it's not really valid because this is just a demo application. So definitely we will have more unit tests in the end than how many scenarios we have, and the unit test will be primarily focusing on those technical implementation details that happened because of the consequence of the design, how we decided to implement that. So that's a key. There is some overlap between that, so that's why it's hard to give a good answer for that. But there is also a difference. I would recommend you to check the concrete scenarios here in this sample application and the concrete unit test in this sample application related to that, and maybe from that you will see some differences. I once wrote an article, and if I don't remember, don't forget, then I will also try to find the link for that tomorrow.
Cool, thanks, Gáspár. Next one from anonymous. Who writes automation code, developer or automation engineer?
I think that depends on the team setup. So the general idea is that the better the team is really working together, the better there is no separation between the ones who are developing the tests and the ones who are developing the code, is the better. But that doesn't mean that there should be no special people who are more specialized to test automation. They just need to work closely together with the developers. So all of the combinations can have its own place. Depends on the project setup.
Mm-hmm. I think actually in modern day world as well, developer and automation engineer, they're almost synonymous with one another, right? I guess a developer could understand, how to automate something. But next question then, could you please show again in Visual Studio how to integrate acceptance tests and unit tests?
It's not integration. I mean, it's just basically two different projects. So I have a project where I have my SpecFlow scenarios, and I have a separate project where I have my unit tests, or at least a subset of unit tests, and whenever I run them, basically I have two nodes, one for the SpecFlow scenarios and one for the unit tests. I don't know whether this is what the question was about, but they are not integrated. They are kind of separated from each other.
I'm wondering if what they're asking is how does SpecFlow steps communicate with the implementations, maybe in the methods?
Yeah. So in this particular setup that you see right now, my SpecFlow scenarios are almost unit tests. So maybe you were just having a peek of how I automated the steps of efficiency. You have seen that I was just creating a controller, whatever, calling a method on that. First it looks like that these would be unit tests. Technically, these are not unit tests. They are integration tests, because they are testing the controllers in integration with all the other services and the database. So yeah, from the definition point of view, these tests are not unit tests, even though that they are entering the application on a technical interface level.
Cool, thank you. Next question, also from Anonymous. How do you organize your feature and steps and reduce duplicate code in steps?
Yeah, I think we had this question. Again, Thursday we will go more deeper into that. Basically organizing that by the area they are automating.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very important. The organization. I mean, the question was a good statement as well. So that having a good organization technique is useful, not just because organization is good and nice structure looks good, but also because this is how you can reduce the duplicates. That's a very good point. Yeah.
I guess join on. Is it day 3?
Day 4, I think.
Day 4. Okay. Remember to join on day 4, and you can find out more about it.
I mean, stay with us, and then you will anyway get the voucher, whatever.
Yeah. Attend all days.
Yeah.
Cool. Can BDD replace manual testing largely?
Manual testing. If you are thinking about manual testing as the manual regression testing, then I think so. Many teams who has started to adopt BDD realize that those things that the majority of the manual testing, regression testing efforts were done can be nicely replaced by BDD scenarios. But that doesn't mean that manual testing has no place. But maybe it will be more turned into manual exploratory testing, which is still a good extension of BDD. So.
Cool. The next question then is, what is the role of a manual tester in the BDD process? Does the role end after writing the scenarios, or is the testing headed by them too?
So again, what manual testing means, so that's a too generic term. So if you are talking about manual regression testing, typically manual regression testing is needed when you have a legacy application and you haven't really got all the things covered by the BDD scenarios, and since that's something that you have to do before you're actually making a release, and anytime if there is anything changes, theoretically you would need to redo that. I guess that's just puts that towards to the end, which is not good, but that's what comes out from the economics of that. If you are talking about exploratory testing, that can be done as long as you have. So once you have one scenario turned to green, that means that one chunk of functionality is already implemented within that user story. So some sort of exploratory testing can be done already, and so it can be a little bit much better ongoing and doing parallel with the development.
Okay. Next question, do you use BDD or TDD for proof of concept projects where the requirement might change based on the outcome of the concept?
I see. I personally don't. as I mentioned, I have seen people who do so. I don't say that it's a no-go, but I don't. Yeah. On the other hand, sometimes, well, it also depends on what is your proof of concept is about. So that sometimes you have a great idea that this and this thing is possible, but you very quickly have to cool down yourself and say that, okay, it's one thing that is possible, but whether it makes sense for the users. And for me, that's the point where I try to write down in a scenario. So if I'm able to make a scenario that reads well and that makes sense, then probably that's technique that I should use, and let's go for that. Otherwise, not. So yeah, but yeah, for technical spikes, I don't do automated tests.
Okay, thank you. Should all BDD scenarios for a feature become regression tests?
They are automated. You don't have to pay anything to become automated regression tests. So I would say, yeah, why not? I haven't really seen case that someone would just disable that particular automation just because of execution time, or I don't know why. Of course, maybe there are some very special situations, but yes, why not?
Cool. Next one then, do you think we could use BDD on data transformation projects like in financial businesses?
Yes. I have, I don't know how to, so yeah, so the short answer is yes. I have used it in a data transformation project for financial businesses and it worked fine. The key thing in the financial such kind of projects is that there are so many things that are changing all at the same time, and it's very hard to keep track of the things. And therefore, a good definition, good documentation of what you wanted, and this is what the BDD scenarios give you, can be life-saving at the end when things have changed upside down from one day to the other.
Cool. Okay, moving on. I've been told that using I is bad in steps, but rather use the user. Example, I log onto the website versus the user logs onto the website. Does this matter?
Yeah, there are different schools. I wouldn't say it's bad. I wouldn't recommend to do that. So because there would be no problem with the I. The only problem is that typical applications have multiple different user roles, and therefore, if you would just use the I, it will be quite confusing at the end. That who is the I and how to phrase scenarios where two users need to work with each other and so on. So that's why my recommendation would be not to use I, because sooner or later you would anyway have problems with I. But for some simple demos or if you want to just learn about BDD, just make some experimentations, not in a real project or in some special cases, there is no problem with the I would say.
Cool, thank you. Next question is, I assume the scenarios are independent of each other. What are the best practices for managing database preparation?
Independent is not the right word. They are isolated from each other. So this means that the execution of one should not influence the execution of the other. There are different database reset techniques, so there is no magic. So obviously, if you need independence, or if you need isolation, then you need to work for that. Either you are using some resources that can be cloned easily, like an in-memory database, or you need to make sure that the shared resources are properly reset before the additional scenario moves on. On Wednesday, we will see some smaller traces of this, and in the code base you will see an example for that. There is no magic. You have to just do it. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. One from Diego. Do you recommend to use SpecFlow to run supplementary tests such as load or stress tests?
I have no problem with that, but usually it's not a good idea. Especially so for load test is tricky, because to be able to generate a load, typically you need to have some test framework which is able to generate high load. SpecFlow wasn't designed for that. So yes, SpecFlow can run parallel, but it's not super optimized for for this load generation scenario. So the overhead of SpecFlow is technically it's too high for that, and it's harder to put it into an environment where this load can really be tested. So you can do that. I think it's that's not the place where it excels the most, or let's say it like that.
Cool. Question here from Betten Buki. I assume the tests are running on a finished artifact. How to fake internal things like date and time?
So I don't think that the test should be worked on finished things. So it's a strategy. Okay, so the best would be to test the things in a way how your users are observing the application. But unfortunately, there are some limitations why we cannot do that. So for example, time travel is not working that efficiently yet. Other resources are not available. So we have to make compromises for testing. Test strategy is about finding the right compromises so that at the end, you are testing the things so you are trying to increase your confidence in a best way. So stubbing out some dependencies, stubbing out time can be absolutely a valid decision when you are considering your testing strategy. So these are not contradicting to each other, I would say, but these should be part of your test strategy that the team should be aware of. So obviously, if you are using a mock time that can be played with, then maybe you should have some exploratory testing where you sometimes testing your application with a real time and see whether this is causing any troubles.
Perfect, thank you. Next question, can both API and UI related BDD tests be used in the same scenario?
Yes, and on Wednesday, as far as I remember, Thursday, we will show some small little traces. I will not be able to have to go into too much into the details of that, but we will mention that. And I think in the code base, you will also find some hints for that. Yeah, but I will show that in detail, a little bit more in detail.
Cool. Good. Next question. Can BDD be used for unit tests, or do you suggest TDD for unit tests?
I use TDD. I mean, so for my unit test, which I write for myself, and I don't need to show it to a business because it's anyway checking some technical interfaces. How do I pass the parameters? I think writing a scenario is just an overhead. So I would use C# written unit tests to be able to test my technical excellence. The BDD concept and the scenarios start making sense if the readability of the scenarios, readability of the test for some externals are becoming an important factor. So you can, but I usually don't do that. I don't use scenarios for TDD. Let's make this sentence proper. But I'm saying this a little bit hesitating because there's two things. One thing is test-driven development, which is writing tests for checking the technical excellence, and one is unit testing, which is a technique that how you are automating a particular bit. And of course, you can automate if, let's say that your scenario is about price calculation and your price is anyway calculated by a single unit, then and it's a business thing. Why you can of course automate your scenarios in a unit test method, but it will be still not TDD. I don't know now if I more confuse the people or less, but that's it.
Cool. Next question from Ilya. Do you set an automation test case limit on your project/features so it will help to keep the number of UI tests low as possible and not grow to some ludicrous amount of tests, basically, per file?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to make a strategy which is where you make a healthy balance of these, whether it's a strict number or percentage or just general guidelines. I don't know, but definitely you should start thinking about how you are fitting into the test pyramid at the end, and maybe what drops out of that maybe the happy path is the one that you are automating through the UI, and all the others are automated on some other layer where it's much faster, or you just make 1 out of 10 is automated through the UI. I don't know, but yeah, definitely this is something that you should consider and make sense to make a team decision about it.
Cool. We've got another one just appeared, but we've got a couple more questions. Should the BDD repository be part of the application repository, or can they be separate?
I think it's beneficial if it's the same repository, but of course it can be separate as well.
Cool. And then the last one then, does it make sense to run multiple BDD tests on the same project along different strategies?
Yes. Again, on Thursday or Wednesday, we will talk a little bit more about that. But yes, especially because of this, how it actually at the end fits to the pyramid. Even in the sample application, you will see the tests automated in different with different tools. Yep.
Cool. So that then, that then concludes the Q&A section of the webinar. So we'll wrap up the session. Let me just grab the chat window open so I can paste some stuff in there as I'm talking. So this page, our Community Heroes program. So if you've planning to make, or you've already made a previous contribution to SpecFlow, maybe you've made some educational content, maybe you've committed into our open source project, then don't let your contribution go unnoticed, and you can follow this link that I'm now pasting into the chat window and submit your contribution. And why is it not? There we go. Good. And you can submit your contribution, and yes, you can get yourself.
May I make a suggestion?
Go on.
If you would like to write a case study about your project, how you started to use BDD and SpecFlow, and how it worked, what kind of challenges you had, what kind of benefits you have seen, those blog posts are very valuable. I think many people would like to read such things, and this is, I'm pretty sure that this also contributes to the.
Yes.
Is it right? Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Cool. There you go. So moving on. So anyone that wants to do a bit of reading or is a bit of a bookworm, then Gáspár has a couple of books out currently for which he's generously providing some discount codes that I'm now pasting the links into the chat. So if you like Gáspár's content and you want to get a bit deeper into these particular topics, discovery and formulation, then follow these links, grab the books. These are digital copies, are they? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so go and get stuck into those. And there's just a mention of the discount is 30% off, which is mighty generous. So that's awesome. And so yeah, that's it for today's session. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and hopefully everyone will come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very good. Thank you very much for
Thanks everyone. No worries. I enjoyed it. Catch you later, everyone.